What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I have an idea, right? I have this theory. I might be retreading water here. I don't know. I don't usually pay attention to other people's theories. I just kind of sit in my own little world and do my own thing. But there's this idea that I've been wrestling with, right? This whole thing that I've been wrestling with, because one of the big things to contend with, and a lot of you all were right in the comment section when you said that with a lot of the stuff that goes on with the multiverse, it's very easy to confuse the audience, and even Loki to a degree will do that. I know that the intention of Feige and all those guys is to say, well, the shows exist by themselves, and you don't need to know what goes on in the shows in order to understand what goes on in the movies. I don't think that's going to be the case, to be honest with you guys. I think that's what they're hoping. I don't think that's going to be the reality. I think the reality is that people are going to be like, I don't understand what's going on, and they're going to have to watch Loki to really grasp it. Either that, or they phrase things in such a way to where you don't have to have seen Loki, but it helps, right? I mean, I trust them. They haven't really done us wrong over the last 10 years, so, you know, I trust them on that, right? Let them do their thing. But here's the thing that I've been wrestling with, right? I've been wrestling with the idea of the multiverse. Now, up to this point, what we've really talked about here is just the creation of an alternate reality, which is predicated on an existing reality. So, as we did in a previous video, let's use Timeline A and Timeline B. Timeline A is the Marvel Cinematic Universe as we know it. Everything we've seen in the movies and the TV shows, and that's it. Now, let's say Timeline B is a reality where Wanda becomes the Sorcerer Supreme and Stephen Strange becomes the Scarlet Sorcerer, I guess is what we would call them. Their roles are essentially reversed, right? Let's say that's what happens. That as far as our explanation, and really seemingly the simplest way of explaining the multiverse, that we all just kind of base it on the idea that like that Timeline B of Doctor Strange being the Scarlet Sorcerer and Wanda being the Sorcerer Supreme, that the history is exactly the same as it is in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, except it was Wanda who was wherever she happened to be and then traveled to meet the Ancient One, and Stephen Strange wherever he happened to be, and the prophecy about the Scarlet Sorcerer was about him. And that was it, right? That literally everything else in terms of the history is the exact same. But one of the things that's gone on really in the aftermath of Loki, what I've been reading a lot about, especially when it came to Kate Herron as the creator or director and the screenwriter, you know, that guy doing an interview and all that kind of stuff, is they were talking about the nature of the multiverse. And this is something that I couldn't necessarily avoid, right? What they said here is, unlike how we had previously assumed, that in the multiversal war between all the different variants of Kang, that he who remains, Nathaniel Richards, Immortus, whatever you want to call him, that he had basically captured and weaponized Alioth, right? Like literally that just giant cloud monster, and used it to basically destroy every alternate reality that basically did not lead to his creation. If it was an alternate universe that led to any version of Kang, that alternate reality was destroyed. And all that was left was the sacred timeline, which we refer to as the multiverse. And we'd had different discussions on whether or not the Ancient One knew about it and different things along those lines. But the reality here is that's the premise we've been operating under. There was an interview that they had done that I wasn't really even aware of after the events of Loki, where they were like, no, so the way this works is that the sacred timeline was isolated from the rest of the multiverse. The rest of the multiverse still existed out there. There were still all those different variants of Kang. So in effect, there was no way to actually kill Kang the Conqueror. That all this really meant is that he who remains had actually used Alioth or what have you to essentially isolate the sacred timeline, right? All those different alternate realities that lead to the creation of he who remains, that he had essentially captured them all and then put them all basically in a basket, right? Kept them isolated from the rest of the multiverse, and that was it. At the end of the Loki TV show, when He Who Remains was killed, this process of isolation was gone, and the multiverse began to basically branch out. And what the sacred timeline did as it was branching out is it actually merged back with the rest of the multiverse. So the multiverse as we would traditionally know it, all these different alternate reality versions of Kang, which may or may not be alive. We can assume Kang Prime, the main bad guy from like Quantumania, that he's like the one who came out on top, where we saw like the statues and stuff at the end of Loki that replaced the Timekeepers and so on. We can call him Kang Prime and call it a day, right? I feel like that's a cool name, Kang Prime. It just sounds awesome. That he was still out there. He just wasn't able to access the sacred timeline for whatever reason. And that was basically it. And I think this is a cool concept, because as I was thinking about that, I was like, well, hell, this changes everything when it comes to Wanda. Right? Because like in that moment when Wanda hears the voices of her kids at the end of WandaVision, that could just be an instance whereby the sacred timeline had merged out into the rest of the multiverse, and it happened to reach an alternate reality where Wanda's kids were still there, right? Whether they were created by her or not is something that we don't fully know. One of the things that we've talked about recently is we talked about this idea that the nature of Wanda, her becoming the Scarlet Witch, is a universal constant. She's the Marvel Cinematic Universe equivalent of the Molecule Man Owen Reese. Her history is the exact same in every single universe across the multiverse. We can possibly even extend that to Stephen Strange, right? That in every universe across the multiverse, Stephen Strange always becomes Doctor Strange. That is always the case. Now, whether or not he becomes evil is something that we don't necessarily know. I mean, we know from the What If episode that he was driven by his desire to save Christine Palmer, which drove him to basically start making deals, pacts, absorbing the power of just different demonic beings that were out there, so on and so forth. And seemingly, what would really be interesting is if those What If stories that took place were not a result of the multiverse, quote unquote, coming back in Loki, but we were actually getting stories about characters who existed out there in the multiverse. They had just been isolated all this time, and that's why we'd never seen them before. But regardless, the thing about this is it brings into sharp relief the nature of Wanda, because what's recently been discussed by Sam Raimi and those guys in Doctor Strange 2 is they're like, no, those different versions of Wanda that you see, those are variants. Those are alternate reality versions of Wanda, which is cool to see somebody finally confirm that, right? So that throws our video about them basically being the same Wanda, just throws it out the window, right? That's gone. But it really is alternate versions of Wanda. Now, the question to be asked here is, just going on this bit of information, why is this important and why does this matter? More specifically, what does America Chavez have to do with any of this stuff? Now, here's the thing, right? Here's a really, really cool concept in Marvel Comics, a really cool idea. Again, the MCU plays by its own rules, but we're going to borrow Marvel Comics here for a minute. So in Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New... God, Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers. God, I love that story. In Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, the idea is you had something called the incursions. And we've talked about this before. So if you've heard about this, skip forward about maybe 2 or 3 minutes and you'll kind of you'll get past all this. But for those of you guys who haven't, you had the incursions, basically alternate realities crashing into each other. At the beginning of the story, we didn't know how that happened. What we ended up learning is that when Doctor Doom and the Molecule Man Owen Reese from the main Marvel Universe realized that every Molecule Man across the multiverse had the exact same history because they were designed to be a bomb by the Beyonders, so the Beyonders could blow up all the Molecule Men at the same time and blow up all the universes at the same time. The stance of Doctor Doom and the main Molecule Man was, we have to start killing off these different Molecule Men, because what it'll do is it's basically like deactivating the bombs of the Beyonders. The problem is when they killed their first Molecule Man, it blew up the entire universe. And when that happened, it sent the universes next to it bumping into each other. And that's how the incursion started. And so in order to basically try to stabilize the multiverse, without them really knowing that they had actually caused the incursions in the first place, they started going through and killing all these different Molecule Men. But over time, they began to realize their efforts were just too slow. It was like having 3 days on the clock before these bombs go off, and there's 100 bombs spread across the city, and 1.5 days in, you've deactivated 2. And so it was just kind of like, okay, there's no way we're going to be able to take care of all this in time. And so what Doctor Doom did is he actually created a group called the Black Swans. And the Black Swans basically did what he couldn't do. Their actions in traveling across the multiverse, killing Molecule Men, and even blowing up worlds to stabilize the incursions, it was the equivalent of Doctor Doom assigning them the task of going throughout the city and basically deactivating all these bombs. Ultimately, none of it worked, and the collapse of the multiverse was inevitable. There was no way to stop it, and ultimately everything happened. But the point that I'm making here is that if we go on the interview of the screenwriter for Loki, where he talked about the whole idea of the show, and he essentially said that traveling the multiverse is the same as time travel, right? You can't travel through time without traveling through space, and that everything basically happens pretty much the exact same. In that instance, he was talking about the interview that he was having, and he was saying, in this universe, it's happening right now. In an alternate reality, it was 10 seconds ago. In a different reality, it's 10 seconds from now. But by and large, it's all essentially the exact same. But the thing about this is that if we were to take that concept and we apply it to Wanda, then again, this really seems to reinforce the theory that we had, that Wanda is a multiversal constant. In every single universe, Wanda always becomes the Scarlet Witch. In every single universe, Doctor Strange or Stephen Strange always becomes becomes Doctor Strange, right? Whether or not he's the Sorcerer Supreme kind of changes, I don't really know. Again, we don't necessarily know a whole lot about like Defender Wong. There's still some little pieces here that we need to kind of put together. But more so than that, this also goes to a lot of the scenes that we've seen. Because one of the things that's come out recently from Sam Raimi and them, and thank God they're talking about it, is they basically say that like these alternate reality versions of Wanda that we see, they're variants. They're not like different versions of the same Wanda from the same universe. She's not going into the past and seeing herself or anything like that. They're just alternate reality versions of her. Now that really begs the question, how is she able to travel the multiverse without having someone like America Chavez to do it for her? And I think that's basically the way in which they're demonstrating just how far ahead Wanda is from Stephen Strange. That Stephen Strange cannot actually travel the multiverse without the help of America Chavez. Hence the scene from the trailer when like he's holding onto her and they're falling through these alternate realities and he's just looking all blocky and then just having different appearances. Fingers crossed we get an instance where he passes through the like into the Spider-Verse reality. That would be cool. Even if it's just like a momentary thing, he just falls through it, right? And like animated Miles like, who are you? And Stephen Strange and America are like, don't worry about us. And like they just leave and that's it. It'd be cool if we got that. But nonetheless, back on track, they are essentially universal constants or multiversal constants are always the same. And showing Wanda having the ability to travel the multiverse of her own free will, of her own volition, without the help of anybody else, Stephen Strange or America Chavez, would show how far ahead of him she really is. But the other part of this, and this is what I think is really going to be a big player in this movie, I'm not entirely sure, but the other part of this is the idea of the Book of the Vishanti. So for those of you guys who don't know about that, and I'm totally speculating here, nothing's been confirmed to say this is the case, but we saw a book in one of the more recent Doctor Strange 2 trailers that was just kind of sitting in like this citadel, right? That looked like it was just kind of out there in an area that had long since looked like it had been destroyed, but the book was just there. Now, the Book of the Vishanti, especially in the context of this movie, would be hugely important. Again, the MCU plays by its own rules, but looking at Marvel Comics for a second, the Darkhold is the antithesis of black magic, right? If it is a dark and evil spell, it exists within the pages of the Darkhold, because that's literally what Chthon did. Chthon grabbed every single evil spell he knew. As one of the earliest practitioners of magic, he grabbed all the evil spells, all the black magic spells he could think of, threw them in the Darkhold, and then basically left it on Earth so that he would essentially have a way back if he was able to find a viable vessel for his essence, or at least somebody who was stupid enough to open up a portal to the Flickering Realms and bring him through, right? Which would basically lead to the end of everything, right? Just lead to the destruction of everything. On the other side of this equation, the Book of the Vishanti is the antithesis of good magic. And so in a lot of ways, they're kind of at odds. Now, in truth, it's not a one-to-one comparison because the power of the Darkhold exceeds the power of the Book of the Vishanti, and there are huge differences, right? They're very similar to like the Jedi and the Sith in the sense that like the Darkhold, the magic in that is designed for offense, whereas the magic in the Book of the Vishanti is designed for defense. You can use them interchangeably, right? You can use Book of Vishanti spells for offense and vice versa with the Darkhold, but nonetheless, it's one of those things where they are basically opposites that are designed to kind of balance and counteract each other. And so I think that's going to play a significant role here. But again, the other thing that I really want to talk about here for a second is I wanted to sort of bring back this discussion that we had when we were talking about like the dreams that these people were having, right? That if you look at Wanda in this scenario where she basically looks upon her younger self or that alternate version of herself where she's basically crying and like her kids are there, that is one of those things where it's like she's just literally going from universe to universe trying to find out where her kids are. And ultimately, I don't think she ever finds them. I don't think she ever finds a reality where like her kids survive. Maybe she does, who knows, right? Where her kids actually exist as opposed to them just being, you know, figments of her creation, that every alternate reality she goes to, her kids exist only because of what was basically the events of WandaVision. So her creating a reality within Westview, basically fabricating or just creating her kids out of nothing. And like, that's basically it. That's all she ever finds. Who knows, right? I have no clue if that's the case. But beyond that, the idea of Doctor Strange's dreams, that we talked about how when he has these dream visions, that it's got a kind of blue hue to it. And I still stick by the idea, that evil version of Doctor Strange, I still stick by the idea that that could very well be Nightmare. I don't know if that's true or not. It would make sense because if he's having a dream why would he communicate with an alternate reality version of himself through his dream unless he's experiencing it through astral projection? But it would make more sense if the sacred timeline basically remerges with the rest of the multiverse, and in the rest of the multiverse are all the villains we've been waiting to see. Mephisto, Nightmare, Shumagorath, all those guys. And now that the sacred timeline, which includes the Marvel Cinematic Universe, has merged with the rest of the multiverse that's out there, now they have a way in. And so that's literally when that merger happens, when that merger takes place, that's when Nightmare is just like, what's this? What's this alternate reality out here? Right? And then basically ends up encountering Stephen Strange and going from there. I mean, from there, you just break out into a whole host of different questions. Why this version of Stephen Strange? You know, I don't know, for the sake of the movie, who knows, right? It's just the nature of things. But I don't know. I mean, I love this theory crafting, and this movie looks like it's going to be amazing. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments section about these different little theories, because this is really more of like a hodgepodge of a bunch of different theories that we've had as opposed to anything in particular. But let me know what you guys think, right? Because I think there's some really cool stuff here. But we're going to bring this to an end, and I will catch you all later. Peace.